Well, it's time for another Patreon request, and this one has been a long time coming, and I apologize full-heartedly that it's taken me so long to get it back out, but I always struggle with these guys, especially with an album that doesn't necessarily connect with me. And I always want to make sure that I'm doing the best job that I can, even if the material I want to praise, because I know that's, like, you wouldn't give me an album that you wouldn't want me to love. So I always kind of struggle a little bit with these. Anyway, that's a whole big ramble to essentially thank my Patreon of Kevin Voljasasak, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Vojjasak. And again, I really hope I got that right, Kevin. But Kevin donated to me. He actually got me to listen to Queensryche The Verdict. So I live streamed that almost a year ago, if not more. And he got me to review this one. And I can see the carryover. I can see how these two albums kind of intersect. So let's dive in and let's talk about this album that Kevin had me listen to. Ray Adler's What the Water Wants. So Ray Adler was, and I guess still is, the lead singer for Fates Warning. And Fates Warning was a fundamental progressive metal band from the 80s. I mean, if it wasn't for Fates Warning and Queensryche, you wouldn't have such prominent bands such as Dream Theater and Symphony X that kind of built their foundation off of what they had started. These bands were doing a lot of that legwork of those longer stretches of music with kind of that metal approach that the mid-80s was really adopting at that time. And then from there, it just kind of blossomed into whatever the progressive metal scene is. So you can thank these pioneers for giving us the progressive metal landscape that we have today. This is an album that deviates from that quite substantially because this was released last year, or I guess 2 years ago. Time has no meaning anymore. This was released in 2019, and it is the track of What the Water Wants. This is one of his only solo projects outside of the Fates Warning. And you can kind of tell that it is more of like a singer's project, as the focal point is Ray the entire time. Even though he's getting up in years, he still has a fantastic singing voice. But it really shows that Ray knows his limitations. He knows when he's able to hit those higher notes, when he can belt them out, when he can sustain a note, and also when he needs to draw back and not necessarily give 110%. And this album does ebb and flow quite nicely in terms of musical expression. I love that some of these tracks are a little bit heavier in tone. Crown of Thorns being the second track and Shine being the fourth track really take kind of center stage and provide a really heavy hitting, more of that like 80s sound. Like, this is a weird album in that it does feel dated in being that late 80s, early 90s style of metal, but it does have the production work, that crystal clear, squeaky clean kind of finish that's on a lot of like mid 2000s albums. So it's kind of one of those weird kind of lost in time albums because it doesn't really fit in any one real decade, even if I would to say this one feels kind of like a mid-90s album, as kind of like a meeting in the middle kind of a thing. And because Ray's vocals are the focal point on here, some of the other things do get a little bit lost in the shuffle, but Ray is a smart producer and a smart songwriter, so he does know when to give certain things its due. Like I mentioned, Crown of Thorns being the second track starts off with a really meaty bass line that kind of sets center stage in that sense. And the drum works found throughout this is quite nice. Like, at no point is there ever like a massive show of effort, but it's always able to be kept on time. The one thing that I do feel was lacking a little bit was the guitars. The guitars I felt were much more of a harmonizing aspect for Ray's vocal works rather than ever having a moment to shine. There's no big chunky guitar licks that permeate throughout this. It is really Ray's vocals that are the driving force through this. And that's actually found right from the first track of Lost, that once we get to that main chorus, Ray's vocals soar on this. And, there is a really nice balance between the harder tracks and the kind of the more softer tracks, even though I feel like the softer tracks are kind of the sore thumb, weaker points off of this. Some Days, Under the Dark Sky, The Road, they all feel kind of derivatives of one another. Like, I don't really feel all that invested in these tracks. At no point do I feel all that moved by them. It does kind of suffer the fate of a lot of these kind of more sentimental metal tracks where it feels less than stellar. And I really wish that there was something more behind them. Now, I really do like the 6th track of A Beautiful Lie because it almost feels like a Offspring song from like that late 90s, early 2000s era, something from like Americana or Americanada, that kind of driving force. That's one of my guilty pleasures when it comes to that type of music because I was in a very formative age at that point. But I love that drive, and that drive is never really let up. As I mentioned, that's where the guitars and the drums are doing a really great job of providing this energy that's being laid forth. I just wish one or both had a more of a moment to shine on this to really kind of stretch their legs and to go into something really special. Now, I've been mentioning that, the guitars really haven't had a point to shine, but if A Beautiful Lie was like my second favorite track, my main favorite track is Wait. And it's mainly because of all those criticisms that I've had for the album. I really kind of shone as a, like the outlier, the exception to the rule that proves the rule kind of thing. Within Wait, we have a beautiful guitar solo near the midpoint, and I love the chorus work, especially once Ray gets in there and it's like, wait, wait, that kind of like yearning, that absence, it's this yearning for hold on a second, which is, I love whenever something like that kind of comes to the forefront. And then we come to the last 2 tracks, the title track of What the Water Wanted, or I guess it's kind of the title track. It's all right, it's fine, there's got some really nice ebb and flows. It's the most popular track off of this. It was kind of the leading single. I just don't feel all that invested in it, if I'm being perfectly honest. There wasn't too much to draw me to it. And the Killing Floor being the last track on it, again, it has a really nice guitar solo near the midpoint that, again, makes me hunger for more throughout the actual album proper. It brings the album to a nice general close as the final track. And yeah, overall, this album was enjoyable, but I don't feel myself really coming back to it. I'm not a huge style of this more raw style of metal. For me, it's a weird kind of rock and a hard place where it's not quite heavy enough for me in my metal preferences. And it's also too energetic to be very enjoyable for like that more heavy prog that I really like. So I'm kind of caught in this weird kind of rock in a hard place. So it's interesting. Like, I realize that I'm probably not the main demographic for this. I'm either too young or too old, but I still have found myself enjoying this. I just probably won't be returning to it all that often or at all. So I think for this one, my overall rating is still a stream. If you're a fan of this style of metal, if you like this kind of like mid-90s metal without being grunge, you'll probably get a really good kick out of it because it does come from a formative member of the progressive metal soundscapes. It's just not quite my cup of tea. But that's what I've got for What the Water Wants from Ray Adler. What did you guys think about this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me and you want to be cool like Kevin, you can donate to my Patreon. Kevin donated enough to get 2 album reviews. This is the first one. He'll be getting the second one later on. Yeah, I've put it into the queue. And yeah, I'm really excited to kind of dive into the second take. And yeah, that's what I've got. You can also check out more of me if you want. Quid Prog Quo is my music podcast. I've got it wherever you can stream podcasts, as well as here on YouTube. And I've got my role-playing game channel where I talk about different role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and Paranoia and the Star Wars game. And I did one on Crash Pandas as well. So yeah, you can find all those. I've left the links down below. And yeah. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time,